Good afternoon. Welcome to Smokin with Swami. And this afternoon, we have Nikki I'm Swami Chaitanya, and our special guest, Jesse Stallknecht, who has joined us kind of serendipitously here today. And we found out that he's a veteran, and tomorrow is Veterans Day. So we want to always honor the veterans who, sacrificed, and literally in order to preserve our way of life, actually, if you come right down to it. But part of that way of life is cannabis, right?
Which makes me want to wonder, are they smoking cannabis in Iraq, Jesse?
I know that they do have hash over there.
Oh yeah, sure.
Charas, do they call it?
Yeah, but some people, but it was very few. I mean, it was so hard to find cannabis or alcohol. The only types of alcohol you found were some types of whiskey and gin. That was it.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, that culture doesn't have alcohol. They don't approve alcohol.
Right. Except the very rich people.
Oh yeah.
Super wealthy houses that we had to go into, you would find alcohol cabinets like you wouldn't believe.
Oh yeah, here you go, Nikki.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
Amazing. Yeah, well that's true everywhere too, that the wealthy play by different rules, right?
Let me ask you this. How many veterans are getting high in Iraq?
Oh, very few. I mean, it's
because
you
can't
get
it.
Other drugs?
No, I would say Iraq was probably one of the places where getting any kind of drug, compared to what I've heard from other wars, was very difficult.
Well, compared to Vietnam, I'm sure, where everyone was stoned in Vietnam,
right.
and opium wasn't that far away.
Even
either.
in Afghanistan, they must have
Afghanistan,
had the opium,
plenty of opium and charas in Afghanistan for sure.
They must.
Because we've both been in Afghanistan. I was there in 1970 and 71.
I was there in 77.
Right, and they still had a king. Afghanistan still had a king, and so did Iran, right, at that time. And you could go overland all the way from Amsterdam. I went all the way from Amsterdam to Nepal.
Wow.
Overland.
Oh,
and you can't do that now.
I guess Iraq was just that much farther south and not much happening. It was really...
Well, Iraq at that time was closely allied with the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
Because their Ba'athist party is a socialist party, and they were getting all their military supplies from Soviet Union and Russia, and so we were actually supporting Iran with the Shah, as opposed to Iraq. And of course, no one at that time really knew much about the difference between Sunni Muslim and Shia Muslim and so on, right? How did you encounter that in Iraq? The difference between?
I mean, they treat each other incredibly different. They're very different in many ways, but. For us, when we were over there, because it was 2003 to 2004, it was the interactions was still very raw. We weren't, and our unit wasn't in towns too much.
Right.
We'd move from town to town.
Well, you're in full combat uniform, so it's not like they're going to invite you in for a cup of tea, especially.
Right. No, actually, after a while, when we started, especially in Samara, when we started doing regular patrols, the people some of them were very inviting, and they'd come bring us in, and they'd give us chai tea, and donut, little biscuits and stuff.
What a civilized culture! It's
beautiful.
So ancient.
Oh yeah.
These.
Well, that is the birth of our culture, actually.
Yeah.
The Tigris, Euphrates, Mesopotamia.
That's right. Fertile Crescent.
Fertile Crescent. It's where agriculture, presumably, or one of the places. There are 5 places where one of the places agriculture developed around wheat and beans, I believe, fava beans and so on.
And then they overdid it, monoculture. That's part of the reason they believe that the Fertile Crescent stopped being so fertile.
Oh, so there used to be a lot.
It became desert. It wasn't always desert.
Really?
Yeah, in the beginning it was Fertile Crescent because it's so fertile.
Yeah.
And then overfarming and ag and kind of similar issues that we're seeing now on a global level.
Yeah, well, as they cut down the forest and get rid of the natural grasses, all the topsoil washes away and so on.
Well, we see that right around here when people cut
Clear
off the top of a mountain.
Clear cut or what have you.
So Jesse, I'm curious too. You've done all kinds of different growings then. You've done indoor, outdoor, sun-grown.
Well, I mean, I got into cannabis partially because, I was diagnosed with PTSD, so I'm 50% disabled for that. And they put me on Prozac, and for me, Prozac made me too robotic. I didn't like it.
Yeah.
And so I started to use cannabis, but then when I was using cannabis, I noticed issues with different strains or the same strain grown differently by a different person. It all affects you differently. So I started learning that it's not just an ag practice, it's more an artisan view. So you have to come at it with like an artistic
artisanal
approach.
craft.
Exactly. Exactly. So that led me into wanting to learn about it and how do I get consistent cannabis or consistent medicine that helps me. So that led into my own, this person says this person says that, this person says this, and it's so different.
Right.
Because of Prohibition, there's such a lack of knowledge and science and so forth, that I just basically started growing on my own, and then I went back to school for plant science and botany and stuff.
Oh, where did you go to school for science?
I started going to Sustainable Ag up in Sierra College, and I was going to go to Davis for environmental horticulture, because I also study or do something called aquaponics, science, and ecology is nice.
So the GI pays for this, most of this education?
Oh, that's great.
Well, because of the disability,
like
the VA program has something called Chapter 31.
So you find it really helps the PTSD? It absolutely.
The right strain, grown the right way.
Right.
I was just reading an article by Dr. Courtney, who's up here, who's doing a lot of research in cannabis for healing. And aside from working with minor, super low doses, right? But he's also talking about healing with cannabis is strain specific.
Yeah.
And he actually found that by kind of watching the way the deer, if they eat cannabis plants, they'll skip 5 plants and they'll always go to that one. They're eating the leaves, not the flowers, right? So it's going to be higher in CBD to begin with.
Yeah.
But they're micro-dosing themselves.
Yeah.
But they're what they call titrating it,
Yeah.
right? So that way you measure your dose, right?
Yep.
And that's the problem with edibles and so on, is it's very difficult to measure your dose.
Yep.
A joint is much easier to measure your dose.
Yeah, and I don't like edibles. And my preferred way of
I don't
smoking,
like edibles especially either.
My preferred way of smoking is a joint.
Right,
exactly. I do like vaporizing, but a joint, if I also want to test cannabis to see how good it is, I have to smoke it in a joint form.
Because a joint gives you everything that's in it.
It gives you all the flavors.
A vape only gives you a narrow temperature range.
You're only vaping.
Some of the vapes now are recognizing that and giving you 5 choices of temperature range on your vape machine, right? But nonetheless, you're never going to get everything that cannabis has unless you actually smoke a joint.
Which strains do you find are most helpful?
I do like OGs. I do like OG dominant strains. Jack Herrera. I like Jack Herrera. XJ13 is decent because it's it has Jack Herrera.
Right.
And I would say mostly the OG dominant.
These work on your head? Is that what you're saying?
I like the head. I like the body.
Well, because that's the traumatic stress. Now they're finding out we have CBDs throughout now cannabinoids, receptors throughout our whole body.
Right, yeah.
They found out that one of the highest concentrations is in mother's breast milk.
Oh, wow.
Because it's transferring immunity to the newborn child, right? Anti-inflammatory, all that stuff that it has. But it's the whole thing through the breast milk, which has the highest CBD.
I mean, there's years where, I've gone sometimes a whole year in my life where my diet fluctuates and my stress levels fluctuate because of life and so forth. And during that whole year, I was able to smoke consistently, and I never got sick. No colds, no flus, no nothing.
Right.
It's good to hear.
So and we're just going to be starting on that medical research. But one of the curious things, we've spent a lot of time in India, and they have a certain kind of medicine in India, peculiar to India, it's called ayurvedic medicine. And they have a whole mythology about how it arose. But it's all from local herbs. And they do a lot of stuff with extractions and oils and so on. And a Western guy got there, learned Sanskrit, went back to the books and found 50 formulas that use cannabis and these other herbs for different conditions. One's for, it's actually one is for excitement, one is for meditating, one is for this and that. Is it delivered with milk? Is it delivered with oil? Is it delivered with butter? All those things. And they have the science, which is thousands of years old.
Oh, yeah.
And so we're going to be able to tap into that and carry that with Western medicine. Western techniques, shall we say.
Yeah, I love the plant, even from bio-remediation, using it to clean soils or using it to clean water or just carbon
Talk about the
sequestration
bio-remediation thing. I've just been hearing about that.
Well, because the plant can just suck up so much. It has the potential. A lot of weeds have the same capability.
Right.
So you can use it to suck up a lot of, heavy metals or areas that are contaminated.
Right.
And clean the soil.
See, that's how we have to say with cannabis. It's not making a negative thing, it's making a positive thing.
Plus, whenever you smoke a joint, you're kind of carbon, negative in certain ways because the whole plant that it took to produce this joint, sequester far more carbon than you're releasing in the burning of it.
Right. I see.
Right.
And we put
Versus the beer, I'm sure there's more CO2 release in the process of making beer and the bottle and transportation
Very good point.
and just growing it there.
Right.
So someone who just even uses this as a form of.
Well, see, that's one of the interesting things about a cannabis plant is the simple cannabis grower can make a finished product.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Now, it can be processed to tinctures or like we've been talking about, but the cannabis grower can make a finished product of flowers.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so that's a unique thing about it. It's like wine growers, grape growers, they don't make a finished product.
Yeah,
Tobacco growers, they don't make a finished product. But we do, right?
Yeah, yep.
And we think, flower smokers think it's the best, the flowers.
Of course.
Right?
That's what I think. Yeah, I love the flower the most. I mean, I like oils and extractions at times, but I definitely think most of that is just to, boom, get super high.
Right, exactly.
But back to the bioremediation, is that one of the things about that is that if you have a plant that has deep and wide roots, right, then it also bonds the soil deeper. So cannabis has roots which normally go maybe 18 inches down. Not much more than that, really, people have to realize. But and they go out to the canopy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, most people don't realize that a tree, your common tree, is kind of the idea that people like to view as a wine glass on a dinner plate. The dinner plate being the root system.
Oh, that's interesting.
Whereas the wine glass is the canopy. The roots will go 2, 3, 4 times out compared to the actual canopy.
And that much
They'll
more.
go far. I mean, some
That's
of these
really
trees around here, their roots are probably 3 times as out as far as the tree is tall. And there's very few roots that go deep. There's certain species, of course, but not that many actually really go deep. They're anchor roots or deep water roots.
Taproot or something like
all
that.
the nutrients is in that top.
The top
few
layer, 'cause that's
inches.
where most of the noise, that's where
all the bacteria is.
the forest stuff and that
Right.
stuff. The
Right.
mycelium
Yes,
is all
exactly.
there in that
Yep.
fuse.
Right. You don't farm the plant, you farm the soil. So you're farming
That's the key.
Right, so you're
Listen,
farming,
everybody, you don't grow the plant. The soil grows the plant. You grow the soil.
Yeah.
And so when you're starting, get your soil tested.
Yep.
Right? And then 2 years later, get your soil tested. Right? So you don't just... See, when I first started, I'd go to the nursery and I'd say, oh, they have all these things lined up. Well, I'll just take one of those, and throw them all in. And so, that must be right, they say, to use it, right? And but after a while, you say, well, let's pay a little more close attention to really what's happening, because if you put it in and it doesn't need it, it's going to have a negative effect. Or it's just going to wash out and go somewhere else. So yeah, get your soil tested is, I think, one of the very first things, and then follow what they say. Add a little of this, a little of that.
Yeah.
And we've been finding most people over-fertilize. Would you say that?
Yeah. I mean, most people that I go and help or consult with, the first thing I do is probably cut their nutrient regime at least in half. Or cut out.
In volume or frequency, or both?
In volume.
Volume.
People
Volume
use
mostly.
way too much. Way too much.
Even generally I'll go 1,000 parts per million. You can use organic nutrients and so forth.
Right.
Yeah.
But you want to, if you also over fertilize, you can also kill all the bacteria and all the microbiology in your soil, and then you have a dead soil.
Yeah.
Then.
Right.
And all that bacteria and all the microbiology in the soil that you're farming and taking care of, they're releasing certain exudates and certain chemicals that communicate with the plant and say, hey, Mr. Plant, certain things are going on in the soil, and the plant picks up on this. So there's, in some of these things we don't even know as far as research, we haven't even figured it out. So it's kind of that cross communication between the plant and all the organisms in the soil. So.
And then the next part is the way the plant talks to us.
Exactly.
Grower.
And then or a deer or other animals that are the bigger one. Right? Because in a lot of ways, if we're peeing and pooping out in the wilderness and so forth in the soil, then that gets incorporated and so forth. Or if we move the plant around or we take it all over the world, then we're helping it spread. We're part of it. Like a pollinator. I mean, I look at the human beings as like almost like we're a pollinator of cannabis.
Well, we have this symbiotic relationship with cannabis. We know that people have been cultivating it for probably 20,000 years, and the evolution of humans all the way back, because it's such a beautiful plant. If you're a caveman or cavewoman, you're certainly going to interact with that plant. Right.
It
smells, it does all these wonderful things.
Yeah, if I had to go to a different world, that would be one of my main plants I'd take with me.
Seeds. Absolutely.
The seeds. And
Absolutely.
that's why it's such.
Maybe
And
grow
maybe,
the
maybe
seeds.
that's how
Yeah.
it got here.
Yeah.
There are people who think
Yeah.
aliens
Yeah.
brought the
That's
seeds.
good.
Yeah, I read that in a book about an African tribe who knew the star systems.
The
Oh,
Dogon
the Dogon
tribe.
tribe,
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. And
Wow,
they knew
that's
star
amazing.
systems were, and then the Hubble telescopes.
Yes.
But they
supposedly-
tell
Sirius.
stuff
They
that
knew
we
about
couldn't-
Sirius.
We couldn't
That's amazing.
know.
Yeah,
And they
it's
know it.
too far for them
Yeah.
to know. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they say it's an amphibian-like race, which is funny that cannabis can grow, and as long as it's oxygenated water, it can grow in water, straight
Oh,
water.
Uh-huh.
wow.
So I did a little experiment this year. I had, and this was sort of, lately a couple of years I got to know Ed Rosenthal, so he insisted I do an experiment for him, right?
Uh-huh.
He kind of always farms these things out, I guess, right?
Huh.
So he says, get a kiddie pool. You know,
Mhm.
one of those solid plastic kiddie pools about 6 feet, so 7 feet in diameter. Put a wooden pallet in it, put a pot on top of that, but before you fill the pot up with soil, you put fiber ropes out the bottom into the kiddie pool.
Okay.
Then you fill the kiddie pool up with water to just about below where the bottom of the pot is.
Right.
Hmm?
So you're just wicking
You're wicking
water.
exactly right, right?
Right, right.
And then cover it with black and white plastic,
Right.
the zebra plastic, right? And so, actually, I got some really potent stuff out of there,
Uh-huh.
but it was my last plant that went in after June 21st, so they never quite caught up with anything
They're
else.
small, but they're sweet.
But they
So-
took almost no water.
So there was a system. I take 2 Home Depot buckets. I cut a hole in the center, and I drop in a little basket so that the basket goes into the bottom of the Home Depot bucket because the 2 buckets together creates a reservoir.
Yeah.
And then I cut another hole with it, and then I put a PVC tube, and then I
Yeah.
filled it with dirt. And then that reservoir, you pour water down through the tube in the
Right.
reservoir,
Right.
and then the water just wicks up through the soil, and the plant roots will help pull
You put
water
any
through.
wick in there or not?
You can put a wick in the basket and then through the soil, but you don't need to.
After a while, the roots just know.
And the
They
soil
know.
sucks up the water. You know,
Uh-huh.
as long as you don't do layers. You can't do layers. All soil has to be the same mix.
Mm-hmm.
That way the water.
But the
sucks
soil
up
actually
the same-
touches the water?
through that little basket. The basket is such that the soil won't go through the basket, but water can go into the basket, into that little soil.
Oh, it's like a coffee filter
Oh,
kind of
right,
thing,
yeah.
one of those
Uh-huh.
metal
Yeah.
coffee filters.
Uh-huh.
And what do you make the
and then I
basket
put
out
an
of?
oxygen stone in that reservoir, so it stays oxygenated.
Oxygen stuff.
And then the
What's
water,
that?
and then the water would only get used according to the plant. So my water management was dialed down to I knew exactly how much water was being used per plant.
Yeah. Well, I'm not that kind of scientific
No, it
person,
worked
but
great. It's
it
the
looked
same-
like
it's
a
similar.
lot less water. I mean, I would put water in there like once a week or
Yeah.
something like
So you're
that.
not losing it to the soil. That's what aquaponics is such a big deal. It's 90% less water than
Yeah,
normal
because the
soil
kiddie pool
farming.
keeps it from draining out the bottom.
Yeah, and then you put the black thing on top to reduce evaporation, and yep.
Right.
You
And
can
actually,
take it a
it
step
actually will
further.
condense moisture on the black side
Yeah,
of the plastic because it's white on the outside.
You
It
can
just
take that
looks
kiddie pool.
ugly, a field of that.
It
It's
does.
my problem.
you could build a pretty thing, throw fish in there, and that'll help feed your plants.
So listen,
People talk-
speaking of harvest and all these things, it's been a great harvest season here at
Yeah.
Ganjama Gardens for Swami Select.
Beautiful
We're going to
place.
have to wrap this up because I think we have to get back to work. I have somebody in the back room, in fact, trying to ask me a question here.
Nikki, so how does this one look for the Emerald Cup? Do you think this is gonna?
For the
Is it a
well,
good
well, we
size?
don't enter the Emerald Cup. Oh, you mean for
the-
our booth?
No, yeah,
For our booth. Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, we're going to be giving away prizes at the booth, folks. That's right. You can win something like
Buds
that.
that
It's
are,
booth number 72 at the Emerald Cup
Colas.
this year.
Okay, great.
Listen,
Thanks.
thank you. Good
Sure.
job. And Jesse, it's been great having you here.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
for having
really
me.
good way
You guys
to.
have a beautiful place.
Good,
Thanks.
thank you.
And
I
it's
wish we
really
could talk
good
more
herb.
about the ways
Thanks.
that
Yeah.
you've grown every different way, right? Indoor,
I love to- yeah, I
outdoor,
love to experiment.
greenhouse, and
Well, we'll have to do it
aquaponics.
again.
Aquaponics, yeah.
Well, maybe we'll have you give you a
We'll need
little
a
corner and you can
second.
try
I
an
would love
experiment
to.
up
I
here or
would love
something
to.
like that.
I would love to.
Cool.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, great.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Anyway, that's
Hey.
it for Smoking with
Thanks.
Swami, and thanks for Jesse Stallknecht and Nikki Listretto, and I'm Swami Chaitanya.